last 10 years, we have seen a rapid transformation of this mobility landscape due to the convergence of technology, the smartphones and the apps that are there within the smartphones. So it has revolutionized how we look at transportation, every form of transportation, the movement of goods and people. So we have Uber for taxis, we have Peloton for trucking, so various kinds of technology that has impacted how we actually move both the long haul and short haul transportation. So this convergence is really changing how cities have to respond to the type of goods movements and people movements. There's a lot of advantages why people are using this. One, certainly convenience is a big reason why people want to use this. Two, it provides real-time information and connectivity to these services when and wherever they want. You're no longer a tourist wherever you go, right? So you can easily get a cab even if I go to Singapore or come to Tokyo. And ride sharing, so you can kind of pool with people, thereby reducing the costs. And so it's saving money for a lot of people and providing kind of money and jobs for many drivers, right? So this is the ride-sharing economy or the sharing economy more broadly speaking. So there's significant advantages, and there's been a lot of hype about these advantages. So if you go back to like 2010, 2012, there's been a lot of articles in terms of the advantages and how this industry is reshaping cities. But then we have to look at the complete picture. So we need to really also look at the costs that these systems actually impose on the cities and on the people, the citizens who actually live within those cities. So which means there are also inequalities which these technologies actually result in, both for drivers as well as for the riders and the service providers. So we need to kind of look at that picture as well. And we need to quantify the externalities, the costs that they actually impose on cities. And we need to kind of be very careful and rigorous in terms of how we actually compute this cost.
Ukkusuri describes the rapid growth of mobility as a service systems and the key factors behind it.
Let's first look at the drivers related to these technologies. So there are three main drivers related to why these technologies have become very popular. The first, of course, is the smartphone growth, right? So it is predicted, these are predictions from 2015, that there are going to be 2 billion smartphones in the world. And my recent statistics show that there are actually 2 billion smartphones just in the Asia Pacific region. So we have already exceeded this number of 2 billion smartphones in the world. And what are people using it for? They're using it for location-based services. They're using it for getting a taxi. They're using it for getting goods like Amazon Prime, next day delivery, right? And so the people's travel behavior is changing for the kind of trips that they actually make. This is one big driver, the growth of the smartphone usage and what people are using it for. The second is the number of sensors and the availability of cheap sensors in the smart platforms, right? So if you take a typical car like Toyota or Honda, I mean, it had about 200 plus sensors. Now a Tesla or a BMW has about 500, 600 plus sensors. So the number of sensing for lane deviations and this ability of these cars to talk with the infrastructure, talk with other cars, has grown significantly in the last 10, 15 years. The technology has significantly improved. These have become inexpensive. So what does this do? These actually make the transportation ecosystem more connected, and cities are actually becoming connected villages within this transportation ecosystem, right? So citizens are better connected with what the agencies can provide. Agencies are better connected with the needs of these citizens. So this is the second driver that we actually see that's actually pushing this trend forward. And the third driver, or the third factor, which kind of contributes to this MaaS kind of a platforms, is the change of the typical traveler itself and their ability to use these kind of services, right? So if you see the data, about 80% of the US adults are actually using these smartphones, right? And they're using it for what kind of things? They're using it for, of course, for communication with their kids, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. But also they're using it for like mobility purposes. They're using it for Uber, they're using it for Lyft and Amazon and so on, right? So last year's statistics, there are about 40 to 45 million Uber users in the US alone. APAC region, right? I mean, as I mentioned, there are about 2 billion smartphones and a growing number of users on these kind of MaaS platforms like Grab and Uber and so on, right? So you can pick any platform wherever you are in Asia or US or Europe. The platform might be different, but the underlying challenges and opportunities are very, very similar.
Ukkusuri goes on to explain the significance of mobility as a service provider's success for policymaking and the future of urban development.
Now, the next question is, so what? What can you do? How can you inform policy making and decision making with this? And that's really our focus, right? So we want to use all of this data to kind of allow cities to make decisions and to allow them to kind of improve the operations of the transportation systems, but also look at the impacts that are there. And we mine this trajectory data and analyze the trip patterns. And we explore how these mobility service providers improve the driver matching efficiency. And we validate this with the traditional taxi system.
Ukkusuri concludes by highlighting new imperatives for ensuring the development of equitable, inclusive, and sustainable shared mobility solutions in Asia and the Pacific.
Potential collaborations that we could develop with ADBI and ADB. In the smart city space, we would like to kind of explore this impact assessment of particularly in Asian cities as to how these inequalities kind of play out and what are the externalities that are there due to this smart mobility. Especially we need to look at this entire ecosystem and how do we do financing for these kind of technologies considering these holistic impacts. Then second, we want to look at e-mobility and its impact in Asia. A lot of interest in India, developing countries like India and Indonesia, where there's nexus of electricity with mobility, like solar and wind and battery. Then looking at financing and insurance options, like autonomous transportation is going to change the insurance industry. And how do we kind of do more user-based insurance rather than a location-based insurance as a whole? Urban logistics and trade impacts, and then anything related to COVID and impacts on transportation. And how do we make this transit system more resilient to these kind of shocks in the future?
This has been Asia's Developing Future, brought to you by the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo. See the show notes for the transcript and related material. For more information about us, please visit adbi.org.